Hello, and welcome to Such a Nightmare Conversations about Horror. My name is Catherine Troyer, and this is one of our super exciting Eerie Extras, which is where Tony and I put all the stuff that we can't fit in elsewhere, including our super exciting interviews. We like to interview horror creators and horror scholars, and today I get to be joined by both a horror creator and scholar. So, thank you so much, Jolie Toomajan, for joining us today. By us, I mean me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah,
I love the podcast.
so
I'm
excited.
so happy to be here.
Thank you. It is so nice to be reminded that, people are on the other side of the recording, particularly when I mess things up like my own name, which is how this interview session started. So, you have a book coming out soon. So we're recording this episode on, what is this? It is May 25, 2023. It will be released sometime in June-ish. But when does Aseptic and Faintly Sadistic, an anthology of hysteria fiction, come out?
Officially, it is out already.
Oh, it is? Okay.
It was out May 21st, I think Sunday.
That's why I Googled it like on the 20th and it was like coming soon. So that's excellent. Okay. So it is fresh off the presses.
So it is fresh off the presses. All of our ebooks, I think, are out. Our packages are still being sort of packed up and shipped away to everybody, but it is out. It is released. It is out in the world. You can read it. Some folks have been very kind to me about it so far. It's my baby. It's fantastic.
It really is. I will say this probably again at some other point, but it's a good piece of horror when it's hard to breathe. And I felt that way as I just I would have to remind myself that it's okay, but then it's not okay. So I'm lying to myself and it just, this is what makes me excited about horror. So I can't wait to talk to you about this more. Absolutely. So I like to start with some sort of very weirdly intrusive question that also makes you have to think about answers you may not have been prepared to answer. So the first question is, if you had a soundtrack to your life, what would be the theme song?
All right, so we're going to take it really old school, and we're going to say that it is Tori Amos's Raspberry Swirl.
Oh, that's exciting. Why?
It's got this sort of both protective and exhausted sort of register to it.
Yes.
And it's also a certified bop. It is a dance in your living room kind of song.
Yes.
And it's very defiant. It's very fun. I always really liked her. I always thought she was super neat.
Yeah.
And so that is going to be, the outro, I guess.
That excites me because you have to have something that you can bop your head to, but also, it can't only be happy. It has to have that note of oh, what's happening here? That's great. I always struggle with this question because my aesthetic personally is creepily whimsical, right? I like you to not know if you should be delighted and find something adorable or just really frightening. And I'm struggling to find what that song is. That's the sort of musical equivalent of that.
I'll have to think about it for a sec.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Because I do listen to a whole bunch of little elf ladies.
Yes, this is excellent. Okay, let me know so I can adopt it. But while you're thinking of the answer to my question, I wanted to talk about the title of the collection because it's beautiful, which is part of what my question says. So there's two parts to this. So the title of the collection, again, for those of you listening, is Aseptic and Faintly Sadistic, an anthology of hysteria fiction, with a nice colon in there between Aseptic and Faintly Sadistic. And then
you got to get
anthology.
The academic. You can't do anything without a colon in the title.
No. I've realized that titles that only have 4 or 5 words make me somehow sad, right? You have to have that colon in there. So let's talk about what's at the front of the colon. What prompted you to choose that phrase, aseptic and faintly sadistic?
So I knew that I wanted to do a reference as a title because hysteria writing and feminist engagement with hysteria is a really long tradition. Mm-hmm. And I saw the things that I was going to pick as being in part of that tradition. And so originally it was going to be a reference to the yellow wallpaper. It was originally going to be Lock the Door and Creep by Daylight.
Oh, that's also beautiful.
And then I thought about it for a while and I was like, I don't know a ton about Gilman, like other than the yellow wallpaper, because until like 2 years ago, I was generally a contemporary scholar. And I was like, well, am I going to bet the farm on a white woman from 1919? And the answer is no.
Yes.
The answer was no.
Good call,
it turns out that I had to learn a few things. And then she went right out. And I was like, all right, so I guess if we're going to do a reference, we have to pick somebody that we know pretty well.
Yes.
Because I'm not trying to get surprised.
No.
And so specifically, this phrase appears in the story. It's the opening line to the story, Brenda, by Margaret St. Clair. It appeared in Weird Tales in 1954, right at the end. And the first line of the story is, Brenda Alden was a product of that aseptic, faintly sadistic school of child rearing that is already a little old-fashioned. And this story follows this girl who finds like a monster on her parents' vacation island. And the ways in which she and a bunch of other women on the island are dismissed and disbelieved and belittled, including using the dreaded H word. And I knew a lot about St. Clair. She's one of my favorites. And there's something, I don't want to give away like the whole thing about this story, but this story itself was the kind of the vibe that I was going for, that like, you don't really know what you're saying and you're all going to pay.
Yeah.
And plus that particular set of words, like as a writer, all of those sounds together are so good.
Yes. And they're visually pretty too, right? Like they look nice. They sound nice. That story, I haven't read it before, but now I'm going to have to track it down. I'm sure you have a copy.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah,
all
perfect.
of Weird Tales is available online at Archive. I'll send it straight to you.
Oh, that's amazing.
Like
Thank you.
5 pages long. It's just, she's one of the ones that I think holds up. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that like right now, if I sent a copy of like, I don't know, the Corn Dance to Uncanny, they would be like, yeah, this was written yesterday.
Yeah. Wow.
Do you know what I mean? Like, no. And so, yeah, I'm a big, big fangirl of hers.
And I appreciate that you as an editor was thinking about the conversation. I could feel some of that in some of the stories. One of the stories that came to mind is Vegetable Wife by Lisa Tuttle, I believe is her name. She's a science fiction writer. And, he grows himself a wife. And it reminded me of course, that last story in the collection, which is How to Build a Girlfriend on a Budget?
I think it's How to Build a Girl to Love You on a Budget.
Yes. So it reminds, and of course that story itself is referencing Pygmalion, but there were lots of times that I just found myself reading something for the first time, but knowing the story already, you know what I mean? Like knowing the trauma and the horror that was embedded in it because I had read that before, right? And so that was really exciting. So I'm glad that you found a way to have that gentle nod. That's lovely. So on the other side, right, of the colon is an anthology of hysteria fiction. And you've kind of alluded to this, the fact that hysteria, that word itself, is so powerful and complicated. And you do a little bit of this in your introduction, but I was wondering if you could sort of define how you were thinking of hysteria within the scope of this project, and also how you see the stories, which are very diverse interpretations of the word, as sort of speaking to each other and building this really complex concept.
So, yeah, hysteria's got a long, 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 complicated history, and it's been applied in so many different ways, and it's such a large concept. It's been applied from everything from like Beatlemania to the Satanic Panic to that summer we all played Pokemon Go together. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
But most oftenly, it is used to silence women and other marginalized people who are speaking the truth about their lives. And it's especially used as a way to silence people in the case of reproductive justice And then, of course, there's also that fun little like wandering uterus bit to it. So I thought that was great.
Yes.
And so in that case, I see hysteria as a way of speaking truth to power. And, there's like a whole, like in some of the ways articulated by like Suzu, in that like, you won't listen to my words, so you're going to listen to this. Mm-hmm. Like, do you know what I mean? It's that kind of using your body to communicate something sort of like dire and important that has been silenced. And so that's been weaponized against marginalized people everywhere. As a woman, you can't have a feeling. Like,
right.
You have a feeling and that's it. You're done. And it's been weaponized against like Black people speaking out about the police. Like, oh, I think you're just, I don't know. We can't see the forest for the trees there. Like, it's used to silence people who are speaking uncomfortable truths about large, powerful things. And so I wanted it to, speak back to that. And so I was hoping for like a series of screams, like stories that gave voice to like the disgust and anger and frustration that come along with being told that you're hysterical, and also with the like power that's inherent of like, well, I'm screaming and no one's going to stop me. Like, so there's like a double-sided coin there, right? And so it's a really loaded term. And I wanted something that challenged the ways the term has been applied. And the stories I picked all engage with it, in my opinion, each in their own complex and really beautiful way. Some of them interact directly with ideas about the problems raised by the idea of forced pregnancy. Nectarine, I'm not going to say anything about the story because you just have to go into it blind, but like Nectarine Apple Pear, in my opinion, like I read that, I felt like somebody punched me in the chest when I got to the end of it. When I figured it out, I was gasping, like couldn't believe it. And then there's this beautiful story by Ian Gabriel Loisel called Right to Life. That's about the reproductive future where like the poor barter for healthcare by serving as living batteries for the rich and the elite. And it follows this young girl who's tethered to like a piano virtuoso. And it asks so many interesting questions like, are some lives more important than others? How important exactly? And like, what kind of loss of control comes out of both of those positions of being important and of being like consumed by power? Because it's about the way that power doesn't discriminate, it replicates itself. Who else do I want to shout out? I've shouted out a lot of them. Christy Nogle wrote, she's got the second to last story. It's Bitter Makes the Sweet So Sweet. And I don't know, if she doesn't win an award for that, Christy was robbed. Like, I get to say that because I'm the editor. But if she does not win an award for that story, she was robbed, unless she loses against somebody else in the anthology. But like, it's about this young woman who returns home to deal with her father, who has come back and he's ostensibly kind of a vampire. And the way that it deals with this kind of hysteria as this low boiling, heightened emotional state brought on by factors that are like really outside of your control. She's one of the most technically skillful writers that we've got out there. I mean, just incredible. She's so adept at finding like this really tender place and just pricking it with a needle.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like it's a subtle story, but when you get into it, it's like, oh, and I had to read them all like 14 times each.
Right.
Oh, pardon me real quick. I had to read them all a bunch. And every time I read that story, I learned something new about it. every time I picked up another small, tiny detail that related to another detail. And if you don't read it 19 million times, you can still get it. But it's one of those beautiful stories that you can continually re-engage with. Phenomenal. Phenomenal.
And that's one of the longer stories in the anthology too.
It is. She's got one of the longer stories. Haley Piper has one of the longer stories. I'm a big fan of both ends of the spectrum. I've got a lot of flash fiction in there too.
Yes, you do, which was exciting.
Tanya Chen's Speak of the Hunger is just like lyrically impressive, so beautiful. And again, it talks about hysteria being sort of a natural reaction to like, have you seen what's going on? Do you know what I mean? Like, hysteria is perfectly warranted. Are you like, Jesus, have you looked at anything?
Yes.
And so like, that's what I thought touched on it. Each of them go at it in such a different, delicate, smart, unique way that like, I just think that they've got something really to say that stands so well in that tradition of people speaking the way that they've been, you know, silenced with that.
And earlier when I said that it made this collection made it hard for me to breathe, I think what you just said explains that, because hysteria is not meant to be a sustainable state of being, right? And yet, as these stories time and again sort of suggested, we've been there way too long. And yeah, something extreme may have just happened, because some of the stories get sort of fantastical, but the one story that's coming to my mind is it called China Girl or China Doll?
China Doll.
China Doll. Yes. Where, I mean, there's the fantastical that's happening, but there also was just the part where she's having to go to the doctor, and let's hope that the doctor actually listens to what she's describing, because, and I could just feel these layers, and that story in particular with that excellent use of second person, you know, which is a hard thing to pull off as an author and as a reader, right? It's hard to sometimes read second person, but we have second person and we have first person, you know, I mean, that was such a good example of the things that you were saying that gave me chills when you were talking about what hysteria is at its heart. So that's excellent.
I hate and love the end of that story at the same time.
I know.
Like, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, I know it's the truth. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I know it's the truth. And that says something about me that I want to resist that too. But like, it's just, yeah. These folks wrote their little booties off. I can't. And they went to a lot of places and said a lot of things that needed to be said, and very loudly, in my opinion. I just thought it was phenomenal. Yeah, that story in particular it's come up a bunch. I've gotten like emails about it and stuff.
Really?
Like,
wow.
People love that story. And I think it's because, especially for women, a lot of us have been there in some way or another.
Yes.
Of being reduced or diminished, and not in that particular method that she talks about, but it's like, oh yeah, I've been there.
Yes. And I think that's what was so powerful, is that in all of the stories, I couldn't identify maybe with the explicit source of horror, but I could certainly relate to all the other layers of horror that are the true things that are causing my chest to be, you know, moving too fast and my breathing to be too shallow, because that was the part I could relate to. And that was exciting. But I want to circle back to something you said about having read, you know, the stories 14, 15, 16 times each, because I've edited a collection now. It was essays that are as opposed to fiction. So maybe it would have been different if it had been creative stuff instead of, you know, academic, but it was so much work, and at times maddening, and like, just, there were times I didn't know if I wanted to lay down or if I wanted to like crawl into a hole. So I don't think I will ever edit again. And I know some people find it and they really appreciate it, but I just want to know, why did you decide to take on this project? And were there any memorable moments where you found yourself just incredibly excited by what you were working on? You've sort of alluded to some of this already, but I just would love to know what made you feel like I need to be the editor on this collection, and then what made you just glad you'd made that decision somewhere along the way?
Man, it is so much work.
Oh my gosh.
This kept me busy for a year. I take back as a creative every thought I've ever had about like an editor, about like long response times. I take it all back. If this was a one-woman show, this anthology wouldn't have come out for 15 years.
Yeah.
Like and as a writer, like when you're on the creative side of it, you don't get to see how the sausage is made all the time. And like, we're all guilty, I think, of like, oh my God, what's taking so long? But then you're staring down like 400 stories. Then you can't read those for 8 hours. Like mental fatigue is real. And it's like, oh, that's what's taking so long. So I absolutely like, oh man, it gave me a real appreciation for what all of the other editors were doing. I would do it again.
Wow.
Not immediately.
Okay.
I'm going to graduate first.
Yes. Good plan. Good plan.
I'll be honest with you. If I can make the lane, like I'm willing to do the work. Do you know what I mean? And so like, if I can get the space to make the lane, I'll do the work. That's fine. Let me see. God, what else did I? It's my baby. And I took it on because I live in the middle of nowhere. I used to live for 90% of my life in major metropolitan cities. And whenever anything like weird happened, there was a way to like voice that or go somewhere. Or you could go to the bar and everybody was talking about it. Or like, if you go to DC and anything happens, you just go to the White House. There's 100 people there. They're already screaming. You can just feel better. And I'm like in the middle of nowhere. There's no vigil. There's no protest. It's just me sitting here calling my representatives who don't give a damn. Like, and so it gave me a place, even though I like had to invent the time to do it, it gave me a place to put that energy. It gave me a little bit of confidence that like, no, I'm really going to be able to help here. I'm going to be able to just like, I know it's not much, but like now it's now you've got $1,001. Like I did my little thing.
Because a portion of all proceeds go towards the Roe v. Wade.
Proceeds go to Chicago Abortion Fund.
Perfect.
And I don't have the exact number on hand immediately, but the first check will be not bad, I believe. And so like, I'm really happy about that. We've done a lot of good work. We did a lot of sales. We sold a lot of pre-order bundles because we had that t-shirt with our cover on it.
Yeah.
Shout out to Mary, who's just a queen. I love Mary. And let me see. So yeah, working with her was phenomenal. Oh, and I've been psyched the whole time. Like I got into this, but when I was making the table of contents, I made like this series of index cards with like the titles and the author, and then on the back, like the length and the like format, if I needed to know that, and like the topic and any major driving imagery, because you have to build it. You know what I mean? Like, and as I was doing that, I have this little stack of cards and I'm going through it and I'm going like, this one should be first. No, this one should be first. No, I want this one to be first. No, this one should be first. And I was like, okay, I'm critical as hell. Yeah. So if I'm sitting here doing this, like I got something here. Like that was looking at the TOC and realizing that like figuring out which story was first was a nightmare. It took me like 3 weeks to do the TOC order.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I can imagine.
Well, I wanted to give everybody had something so important to say. And I know a lot of people say build it with like your strongest stories first. And like, well, that was impossible because all of my stories were the strongest stories. And so I tried to build it by like certain themes. Do you know what I mean? And things like that. But Yeah, going through that table of contents, man, that was when I was like, damn, this is real and this is incredible.
That's great. I always appreciate it when you can tell that the editors did take time to build a narrative with the stories as they relate to one another, right? As opposed to just the big named authors first or whatever it might be. And I will say that was my experience. That was the one, like when I saw the table of contents and realized how amazing each essay was, that was the shining moment. The hardest part, which I don't think you had to deal with, was we had to do an index, and I hate it. I realized I will never.
No index for me.
Yeah, I will pay someone the next time, or I just won't have an index. Like it was a nightmare.
You have to pay somebody. Now that I'm in the middle of my dissertation,
oh my gosh,
and I find a book without an index, I was like, I will hunt you down.
I know that is true. Like that, I use it too much to like not put it in. But dear heavens. So I have a question, because all my editing is usually either, on the academic side, or it's helping students to push their horror writing, which is just kind of a separate creature. But like this was not one of the questions, and I apologize ahead of time, that I had prepped you for, but I just am curious, how hands-on were you as an editor? And what did you see as your role in being the editor of these really great writers, many of whom, have been writing successfully and prolifically for quite some time?
Listen, some people just got an email that said no changes. I'm not I'm not gonna lie. Not a lot of them.
Okay.
But some people got an email that said, like, what do I have to tell you? Nothing.
Yeah.
Like, and that actually, a couple people you wouldn't expect got no changes too.
That's exciting.
Because what I see my role is not necessarily to like get my little tootsies in all of these pies and rearrange them all. It's to really sit down and figure out like what makes this story the most it can possibly be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I approach them all very individually. Some people got a couple line edits, flow edits, you know what I mean? Nothing major. Some people got no edits. There was just nothing I had to say. Like, you built this. Maybe somebody who's got more experience than me knows, but I'm like, no, I see where every brick is supposed to go. I can't see a single thread loose. So why am I going to fiddle with this?
Yeah.
Like, that's not my place.
Yeah.
And so, and I don't think I didn't ask anybody for major developmental edits, because I sort of figured like I was not in the habit of saying yes to things that I thought needed major developmental edits.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was difficult though, to sit down, and especially like the level of some of that writing. I was like, could you just come beta read for like me? Can I just like, I'll pay you.
Yes.
I'll give you whatever you want.
Yes.
But it was humbling. Some of it was deeply, deeply humbling as an editor.
Yes.
And so, yeah, my editorial philosophy is basically like, I'm here to like whoop you up. And sometimes that means doing nothing. And sometimes that means like fiddling with your opening and closing line. And sometimes that means fiddling with the flow of your sentences. But I tried to do my best to make every story the most of what I saw, and there goes 90 years of education helped me with this, the most of how I saw it being built. Because I've got through all this ridiculous education, like the ability to see the math equation as it goes in there. And so I just sort of made sure that nothing was out of place in like your own personal equation.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's a really lovely way to think about editing. I'll have to keep that in mind when I'm helping the next batch of students, because I teach a class that meets a creative expression requirement. So they are writing horror fiction, and I think it will help them. Yeah. So they write, or actually one of my students made a doll, like, so they can kind of do whatever they want. And then they made a film, but like, I think it would help them, because I get a lot of STEM students, surprisingly, to help them think about it as that analytical, right? That it really is about like, no, it has to be 5 because the numbers are 3 and 2.
Yes.
That's really helpful.
I've explained it to like people before, like what I used to explain to my students is that like it's not magic, it's not talent. It has a structure.
Mm-hmm.
And once you can see the pieces of the structure, and once you know the history of how pieces of that structure have been used,
Mm-hmm.
like you can begin to fiddle with it.
Yes.
And like, yeah, that's sort of very much my like, no, writing is not mystical. There are rules and laws to it.
Yes. And that's why, I mean, that's at the heart of this podcast, really, because I spent too much of my life being taught that there was the creative and there was the scholarly,
Mm-hmm.
and that, you know, I should treat these two separate
Mm-hmm.
creatures. And it's like, but I'm a better writer when I'm analytical and creative, right? Like I'm a better scholar when I'm creative in how I approach something. So why wouldn't I blend them together? But I don't think I say that to my students enough in the creative class.
I feel like having done like an MFA and then like an analytical scholarly based PhD afterward, I really got like the best of both worlds done. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? Because I was taught that ability to really get into stories that aren't mine.
Yes.
And that's so, so important. And so like I am the close reading champion, the close reading champion of the world.
Yes.
But like, yeah, it really is. I think that mix is really important to understand. And it's something that young writers don't understand a lot. I certainly didn't understand it. When I was young, I thought that I was just a genius and these things that were falling out of me were just genius. And not that I was unconsciously mimicking all of the things that I had already internalized.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, you know, the advice is always to like read if you're going to be a writer, but I wish more people would explain it's so that you can do the equation, right? Like that's why you're reading. It's not just so that you know what's out there. It's so that you can understand why your story has to be end at 5. Because again, you had 3 and 2 as your numbers. Yeah.
And like you read it and you go like, if you read a story that you were like, I don't like this ending, this twist ending blew me away. Like it's in there. It's not a mystery. You just need to sit down and look at every spot where the ending was either hinted at or gestured to, and then look at how they built it.
Yes. And I think with horror, if you don't know how to analyze the source of horror, right? That thing that is supposed to keep your audience up at night and make them feel really uncomfortable. And in good stuff, it's rarely the obvious monster, you know, lurking in the corner. Once you learn how to do that, then that's when stuff becomes scary. You know, my students are always like, this doesn't feel scary to me. And I'm like, that's because you didn't write something that was scary to you. You didn't write something that touched on one of your sources of horror. And then by the end of the semester, I'm like, now you're touching on the stuff that terrifies you deeply. And it's the stuff that your anthology is all looking at, right? It's the stuff about, why aren't you listening? I'm screaming here. And I can't scream much longer. So that's just so exciting. Okay, so you've got your MFA and you have your creative side, but then you are also this horror scholar who's so very close to being done with with the dissertation. And you said that you're working on a project that's examining the women who wrote for weird tales.
Yes.
So I put a limit on it because I know that like you're literally writing a book on it, but you get out 3.
You got 7 hours for me to geek out.
I've learned my lesson. You get 3 of the most interesting things that you've learned about in your research. Because what's exciting about your research is that you're looking at something that I'm not sure a lot of other scholars have really looked at.
Not a lot. There are some, but as per usual, the women have been fairly roundly ignored.
Yeah.
I had to spend a lot of time scraping together other women academics, sci-fi academics have done tons more work than anybody in like the Gothic or the weird tales era. They just sort of skip them.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so like, I just, no. So like, absolutely not. And it's It's a passion of mine. All right, so let's do the three things. I'm going to limit it. One of these is longer and two of these will be shorter, I promise. But here's why it's a passion of mine, right? There is this idea that you will especially see put out by certain folks that horror, speculative fiction in general is the playground of like cisgender, able-bodied, like white men who invented this. And now we're at the gates of their house, like telling them that they have to redecorate, right? Mm-hmm. This is demonstrably false. This is not the case. Weird Tales is like the place that birthed our modern understanding of speculative fiction and especially of horror, right? It still exists. It's amazing. Everybody should go read it. Mm-hmm. It is one of the most consistently interesting vehicles for speculative fiction that we've got. This is literally the playground they are talking about, right? And so let's see who's playing. It was full of women. Like, it was full of women. We have more information about women than we do about other marginalized folks because that was basically collected by like names, which was easier to look at. And we've also lost a bunch of stuff. But it looks like there were around 500 women pulp authors who were active at the time. Wow. About 130 of them wrote for Weird Tales. Usually, in fact, a lot of them wrote, all of the women in my dissertation, more than once. Some of them wrote 15, 30 stories, over the course of that time. All of the editors published women writers during their tenure. 40% of its poets were female. About 30-ish% of its fiction was written by women. About 40% of the Weird Tales Club was women. It was run for 99% of its original tenure by first a disabled man and then a woman. Most famous cover artist, Margaret Brundridge, was a woman, right? And so I'm not saying it wasn't like harder for women, right? Sure. I'm not saying that they found it like super easy to just waltz into Weird Tales and they were just throwing bags of money at them. No, it's not a level playing field. We've always dealt with inequality, but on that severely unlevel playing field, we've always been playing. And so like the first thing that I've learned, like first and foremost through this, is that this is not your playground. You have decided that this is your playground. Maybe you haven't done your homework. I'm going to get a whole bunch of hate mail for that. Maybe you don't know it as well as you think you do. But like, no, you're wrong. Just because you read all dudes doesn't mean that those are the only people doing anything. And so that's my like fist pounding like realization out of that. Let's see, the Funsies one of their writers, Mary Elizabeth Councilman, was this real character. She got sick of her husband, so she bought like a 160-ton steamboat that she named Liata, moored on her property, and when she was sick of him and wanted to write, she would just like get on her boat and she was the queen of pulp fiction gossip. If you wanted to know the tea about the editor, you wrote to Mary Elizabeth Councilman and she would tell you. And her son threw away all of her papers and manuscripts despite being begged by the library to archive them. And I don't know if he's still alive, but he can see me in the parking lot. Yeah.
Has he given any sort of explanation?
Not that I've been able to find. No. I imagine that he just resented the whole damn thing. Or I mean, alternately, maybe she wasn't a very good mother. Like that's
maybe she was on her steamboat instead of,
maybe she was on her steamboat and left him. But yeah, she was like the center of like Lovecraft's letters are one thing and we still have them, which helps. But she was really the nexus point of like, oh, let me tell you about him, honey. And that's where all the good information is. Yes. And let me see. The third thing I learned, one of the very first, I think it's the second advertisement in the very first issue of Weird Tales is for Margaret Sanger's book on birth control, Woman in the New Race. It is one of the very, very first advertisements.
That is a fantastic tidbit.
I know when I saw it, when I was going through the archive, I just had to keep reading the magazine, and I saw it and I was like, damn. Already, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know what I was expecting to find in there. I think, and don't get me wrong, like, it's full of racism and Orientalism and sexism. It is not like, progressive. It's, I mean, some of it is, but like, it's a real mixed bag. But I think immediately opening it up and finding like in 1924 birth control was for me like a real like, oh, this is a little different than I thought it was.
Yeah.
Moment, I guess.
So did you, you mentioned archival. So there's an archive that you were accessing all of these in their sort of original form?
Internet Archive.
It's an Internet Archive.
Our friend, the Wayback Machine.
Wow.
Our friend, and because Wayback Machine and Archive is under a whole bunch of issue, I guess. They're getting sued for letting people like read books, I guess. Oh. So I actually, just in case, downloaded every freaking PDF. Every last one.
That's amazing. I'm the same way. If I can digitally hoard it, I'm going to, because I'm not going to find out. Yeah, I can't have that like, oh, this thing that I've been relying on
is gone.
Yes.
No, I can't. I can't.
What made you, committing to a dissertation topic is not an insignificant commitment. What made you feel like this is the direction you wanted to head? Which is also, for those of you listening, a question that I did not give you ahead of time.
Nerding out about it over my comps. My comprehensive exams were on a slightly different, it was on contemporary. I was planning on writing on contemporary stuff. A lot of my comps was contemporary stuff. A lot of Helen Oyeyemi, all, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I started reading some of these women though, because I was reading for like the whole 20th century. And I started reading Margaret St. Clair, and I geeked out about Margaret St. Clair. And then I checked out a couple of the other ones. And I didn't quite geek out about them the way I did like Margaret St. Clair. But like, as a little girl, I had actually read C.L. Moore's Shambleau. I was like 13 years old. It was in an anthology of horror stories about cats, which is not entirely the case with that story. But I had read that when I was a little kid and loved it so deeply. And when I got into Margaret St. Clair, and I realized that was in the same general vicinity as her, that was another woman pulp author. And then I also really liked... this is a little later than my archive, but, oh no, what is her name? The little dirty girl. She's also a scholar. Joanna Roos?
I don't know.
How to Suppress Women's Writing?
I'm so bad at remembering author names.
Same.
Yeah, but character names.
She wrote The Little Dirty Girl.
Okay.
And so I started reading a lot of this pulp stuff to take my comprehensive exam, and I realized that it was so much different than I had thought. And that they were saying a lot of things about their lives that people claimed were sort of new expressions for women. Like a lot of them were really like marriage. Marriage is the subject of a lot of like, I'm not interested in any of this shit. Like they were saying a lot of things about their lives that people claimed are sort of newer speech. That women are unhappy now and that our grandmothers didn't do this. Well, apparently, yes, they did. And they were writing about it in Weird Tales.
Oh, that's so interesting. I really liked your first, I enjoyed all of your three interesting things, but I appreciated that your first one about this reminder that, this is not something where it's like, we temporarily let you women in as house guests, but please know that, we've created this home. It's like, no,
the hell out of here.
Yeah. And I think that's something that I often have to really work hard to get people to see who don't really know horror, right? Because because the horror genre, the contents especially, have historically, what has been mainstream, been both a challenging home for women and BIPOC and queer writers, at the same time that it's been the perfect place for writers to explore the horrors of being marginalized, silenced, and broken over and over again, or, made hysterical over and over again. So you alluded to this at the very beginning when you said that you wanted Aseptic and Faintly Sadistic to be in conversation. In your terms of your dissertation, you talked about the fact that this is not a new conversation. We have been part of this story from the start. So how do you see Aseptic and Faintly Sadistic as entering into this conversation with not only the genre of horror, but also with a world that needs to be reminded that women make horror just as much as men?
So one of the main problems that I see marginalized writers having is actually space. And space means a lot of things. For one thing, it means venues. But for another thing, it means having people at those venues who are able to properly process and engage with stories from women, from marginalized people, from BIPOC, from queer folks. Good writing isn't a universal white Western concept. And so good writing means something different, and what you engage with means something different. And so you can say that the door is open, but if you don't have anybody knowledgeable about how to connect with those modes of writing when you get them, then the door may as well be closed. Do you know what I mean? And so the first awesome thing that happened here was that the gentleman at Cosmic Horror Monthly knew that they wanted to help, but they also wanted to clear the bar that is in hell, and that they were going to need somebody who had had more experience in this than them. They knew that it was kind of a specialized knowledge or breadth of lived experience that they generally didn't have. And so call Carson up right now and ask him, I don't know, how many times in his life has a man told him that he was being hysterical, and how has that made him feel each time? There's a level of experience that needs to be sort of brought to some of these things. And it's not necessarily gatekeepy. It's just knowing that certain knowledges matter. And the knowledge of lived experience is one of those knowledges that counts for quite a bit. And so where I saw it going was making the tiniest space for the teeniest sliver of us who needed to say it. You know what I mean? And there's a lot more work to be done, but my little drop was that I tried to be a good shepherd for your stories. I tried to connect to you on the level that you're coming to me on. I tried not to evaluate you against, I don't know, against some construct that's not quite universal to begin with. And so that's sort of where I went in there, is I just made a little spot, and it's a spot for people to speak. And even if it's just, in our little horror community, even, I made a tiny spot for people to speak. And that to me means so much, because just having the space is so limited and so difficult to find when you need it, I've gotten so many rejections from people who just plain didn't get it. Do you know what I mean? Right. Where it's oh, you didn't get it. I'm not mad at you, but
yes. And I think that's what we need, right? We need those little spots. I read a really interesting op-ed that was not at all about horror. It was about the filmmaker and writer Mindy Kaling, and And it was saying, we can't be mad at her, even though she writes the exact same character in everything she does. We need to be mad at an industry that has made it so that is the only character we get because she's the only one getting to write it. And, and I thought that was the most, in a world that is so interested in blaming people, it was so nice to read something that was like, no, let's take a step back, but also let's cast the blame where the blame is. And it's, you know, Jordan Peele is only going to be able to write the stories that Jordan Peele can write, but he shouldn't be the only Black filmmaker. One,
yes.
And that's what I enjoyed about, that's why I think this had to be an anthology, right? Like, I needed to hear everyone's voice and know that not all the stories resonated with me on the same level, but that's okay, right? That's not what it's supposed to do. But knowing that there was a voice out there that is for someone, just was, again, it made it difficult to breathe and in a really good way.
Yay. That's one of the things that I've noticed about this anthology that's great is that everybody I've talked to is madly in love with a completely different story.
Yes.
Everyone I've talked to is like, this is the one. This is the one. I've got my own ideas that are completely private, we'll never hear.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like, this is the one. This is the one. So everybody that I've heard from has resonated with a different piece of it. And so that to me, that means that, you know what I mean? Like, that means a lot to me.
I sometimes struggle as a reader with short story anthologies precisely for that reason, right? Like, not every story is going to hit you the same way because you're going to find that some writers work better for you. But whereas sometimes in some anthologies, I'm frustrated because I'm like, I didn't want to read this story. I wanted to read more of so-and-so's story. I didn't feel that way in reading this one. And I think some of it is honestly the caliber of the stories is so high. You did such a good job of finding the voices that needed to be put together in this anthology and letting them shine. But also
that slush pile.
Oh, so how many submissions did you get? Do you remember?
Around 300.
Oh my gosh.
Which for a very limited call.
Yeah.
Is, in my opinion, a lot.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
And I had the first little like, what if nobody sends me any stories? Like, do you know what I mean? Like that little scared. And then within 3 days, I was like, well, that's certainly not a problem we're going to be having. Like,
yes.
We had the completely opposite problem where like I had 100,000 words and they were like, yeah, you got 50,000 words. Like,
oh my gosh. Yeah, that's its own devastating issue. But the fact that you allowed the different voices to be together in this case, maybe because I knew that we needed to hear everyone's version of hysteria, even if it wasn't my version, right? Just meant that the piece or the collection resonated in a way that I don't usually feel like is true for anthologies that have as many diverse stories as yours do. Because like you said, you have flash fiction, you have lyrical horror, you have stuff that's bordering on science fiction. And that's a hard sell, right? To be like, read all these different versions. But I think your part of your title, an anthology of hysteria fiction, was great. Did you purposefully avoid the word horror in the...
No, but when I got a bunch of the stories, I was like, classifying some of these as horror is not correct. Do you know what I mean? Like, and so I just didn't want to do, you know what I mean? Like, I just went with the speculative word. We're just going to go with speculative.
Yes.
Because there's a couple fantasy stories in there. I think there's 2 fantasy stories in there. Mother Mansrot, she's going to be reading at our release party, which is happening. Well, when this comes out, we'll have happened 3 weeks ago.
Is it virtual?
It is virtual, yes.
So
do you have the link?
No, you'll have to send it.
It's up in Howls. I'll drop it again as soon as because I'll be dropping it again tomorrow too, and I'll tag you.
Perfect. Excellent. And for those of you that don't know, Howls is the horror-obsessed writing
and Literature Society.
Thank you.
It's a book club.
Yes. And it's on Discord, and it has been a game changer in connecting to the horror community, because I don't think I realized I always wanted to have that cafe, right? Because I was also an English major. That cafe that was probably going to be in Paris, where the 5 other people were also seated there. And I've bemoaned the loss of that my entire life, for something that, you know, probably wasn't actually that wonderful anyway, considering the people that were in that cafe. But this is our version of that. This is, and it's really exciting because I know there are people that are in there. And I would say you're one of them that I'm going to be able to start saying to not just people in house, oh yeah, I got to talk to Joel, and they'll be like, Jolie, and they'll be like, not Toomajan, and I'll be like, yes, I got to talk to her back when she was still talking to the little people. Like they're, and
she big timed all of us.
Yes, and Christy
$8 million and nobody ever saw her again.
And Christy Nogle's on that list, right? There's several people that I'm just like, I'm gonna get to have a back when story someday. So there
are a lot of people in that little writers group who I think are either the current wave or next wave, and that we will be reading in like 100 years.
Yes.
Easy. Christy's one of them.
I have never been a part of a group that is as prolific of writers and readers. I mean, sometimes it's discouraging because I realize that, in like a 2-day period, some people write more than I feel like I get to in a year, but it is a reminder that it is about coming to it on a regular basis as a craft. And
it
it's just really
takes me 6
exciting.
months to write a story.
Well, that makes me feel so much better.
Fine.
There's some of those folks that are just like,
no,
just wrote a novel yesterday. And I'm like, dear heavens, please stop. Please just
Carson.
stop.
Carson Winter, my co-author, is, and one of the fine gentlemen from Cosmic Horror is like that. Yeah. He's like, I wrote a short story yesterday. Took him like 6 hours. He hands it to me. It's freaking perfect.
I know. I get to talk to Carson on this podcast on a regular basis. In fact, I'm going to be interviewing the two of you together for your project that's coming out. Yes, and it made me a little sad when he was like, "Well, I've got 17 projects in the works," and I was like, "Oh, okay, well."
Listen,
thanks.
I got 2 stories out floating in the world right now, and that's all I'm going to do for a minute. Some of us,
in your defense, though, you are also dissertating. So, like, that's a whole...
Yeah, that's true. That is a whole...
rock around your neck pulling you down. Do you know, so when I finished, the day I defended, my partner and I took my dissertation in its binder, and we went to Toys R Us, and we put the binder in a onesie, and we took photos, like the people do. And so there's a photo where I'm, like, holding it up.
Can I steal this?
Please do.
Can we?
I have never laughed so hard and felt so free. Yes.
Thing.
So I put it, there was one in a crib, and I found some like spooky onesies, right? So I had one that was in a spooky onesie. We did all the stereotypical baby photos. My cousins, who were all having human babies, were a lot less amused by it than I was, but I have
not the
literally
human baby havers.
Oh my gosh. But I have never laughed so hard. In fact, I was afraid they were going to ask us to leave because what were these adults without children doing with this like binder? But you should 100% do it. It's the most cathartic experience you will ever have.
I think, you know what? I'm going to put it in a stroller and just put a picture of me out in front of the house.
You have to. And just see, and it's, look what got delivered. And then
if my parents ever lose their mind and start saying something, we're just going to send them that picture.
See?
You're the one who said that education was the key.
That's right.
So
education is the future. See? So
now that you're done getting a medical degree, like when are grandchildren like that?
Oh my gosh, yes. Oh my gosh. So other than the dissertation, which is nothing, but also probably something that you're just eager to get done as opposed to super excited about at this moment in time anyway. What is next for Jolie Toomajan?
Okay, so first of all, as soon as this party is done and this anthology is launched, I am disappearing for 4 weeks and I don't want to hear any words.
Oh
Nothing.
My gosh.
Nothing. I don't want to hear. I'm going to spend like an entire day in a hammock with just like no phone and only like instrumental music. I don't want to see the alphabet.
Oh my gosh.
I don't want to see the alphabet.
That's going to be amazing.
And once I recover from the anthology,
yes.
I have a book coming out in October. I'll get to come see you again.
Yes, the one through Tenebrous Press.
Tenebrous Press with Carson Winter, Post Haste Manor.
Yes.
the deconstructed history of a very haunted house.
Oh, I'm so excited.
It was so fun to write. It's a little different from my usual fare. I'm usually a very like, I write horror, but the ghosts are depression. Like I'm like one of those people. And this was like a body count. And like the ghosts are still depression.
Yeah, sure.
But there's more of a body count to this than you usually get with me.
That's cool.
There's a little more gore. There's a little more like to it.
And Carson told me that the two of you hadn't worked together prior to this.
Nope, we just did it on a whim.
Oh my gosh.
Don't tell any. Everybody's going to know now and hate us.
I can't wait to see the product of it.
No. He had a story out in about maybe a year or two ago, both of us. He had a story out in Apex magazine that I thought called In Haskins that I read and like, I couldn't like, damn, bro, like Jesus. And then I had a story in Black Static called Elizabeth Frankenstein is the Saddest Girl on Earth that apparently he read and had the same response. And we were like kicking it back and forth one day in chat. And he was like, why don't we do something? And I was like, yeah, all right, whatever. Because I just thought that he was, you know what I mean?
Right. That's a phrase that gets used a lot, right? Like we should definitely collaborate.
And after that, we'll start a band. Yeah. Be great. But like, we were like talking back and forth, and I don't know how it worked, but we just really played off each other really well. I adore him. He's like my little brother. And like, even though we have like completely different writing styles, working with him was a joy. We had one minimal disagreement. It lasted for 3 minutes, and we went to the publisher and said, you need to be the tiebreaker. We can't decide.
Wow.
That was it was about what order we were going to put things in. That was everything else. Like, and I've heard other people have had horror stories with co-writing, but like, no, we just rocked out and goofed around for like 6 months and the book fell out. Like,
that's so cool.
It is. I need a break, but it was wonderful. I'd write with him any day of the week. He's fantastic.
Yeah.
I can't wait till you get to see us both. Then shit gets real live.
I know. I'm as you've been talking, I've been thinking about my most recent interview with Carson and just thinking about like how much fun it's going to get to be to talk to the both of you. Cause I can.
Yeah. We play off each other. It's a constant game of yes and with each other. It's
what better way to write though, right?
It's a good writing partnership. Yeah. You know what? It's a really good writing partnership. And I've had some that were not so fucking great. Yes. And this is just really, I think what it is Carson and I have very different writing methods. We have very different writing styles. We have very different approaches. But he and I think, are chewing on the same basic problems. Do you know what I mean? And a lot of it is about the sheer grotesquerie of the world around you.
Yes.
And he sort of leans into it and exaggerates it, whereas I'm one of those, like, enough rope to hang yourself sorts. But, like, we're discussing the same things. We're just coming at it very differently. That book was a blast to write. I hope you guys have a blast reading it. Shoot, we should be oh God, edits should be through soon. Oh no.
Oh my gosh. You're going to have
It's so much faster than you think.
Yeah. That's so cool.
So that comes out in October, and then I defend my dissertation in November. And then.
Oh my God. And then you're going to lay down, right? For
about a year. Okay, about a year. No one's going to. I'm done.
Honestly, yeah, you should. You it will be well deserved, but you'll also probably need it. You'll be so fried, just from because you're promoting. It's not like you're doing nothing right now, right? It's not like stuff is only happening in October. Oh,
no, the thing that I have to do once I get out of here is actually do some stuff for Post Haste Manor to hand over to Tenebris so that they can start doing their work for Post Haste Manor.
Oh, that's great. That's
so great. Yeah, we're already starting on that. That's already on the pile.
And if you, without like locking you in, because no one's going to be like, but this is what you said on the podcast. If in a year or a year and a half, when you have forgotten the heartache of being an editor, and you've forgotten that what it's like to be so tired that you want to lay down and never get up again, what would you want your next anthology to sort of examine if you were to do another?
I would probably want it to be another limited call anthology, another marginalized voices anthology. What would I like it to examine? Oh man, you finally got me.
I know. Yeah, that was definitely not a question that I had given you time to prepare. Sorry.
What would I like it to examine? No, it's okay. Let me think about that. What do I... Family, the way that families hurt each other, I think, is and family is one of our most powerful images. Like hysteria, it's a very, very powerful image that's used to minimize and hide and excuse a lot of really horrible things. And so I might think of something else in the meantime. But I think that the concept of family is kind of like a sacred cow. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can't not talk to her. That's your mother. Like, yeah, fucking watch me. Like, that's one of those sort of things. And like, people really treat you some type of way if you're not really involved with your family. And so I think that not just like the weird, perverse things that go on in family, but that larger implication of having like this sacred golden idol of a culture that is untouchable, that we have holidays surrounding, that we have our entire lives are told over and over and over again that you have to be around these people because you are related to them. Like, I would really like to see horror that doesn't necessarily deal with the family dynamics, but with that outside pressure of like, it's really hard to escape and have people treat you like you're freaking weird.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what your family did. If you don't talk, you could be like, they locked me in a closet and beat me. I was the child under Omalus.
Right.
And they would be like, but she's your mother.
But it's
like,
her birthday. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And they do it. And I've got a lot of friends who have sort of wobbly home lives. You know, I grew up in kind of a dysfunctional house. And when you finally say, like, this is dysfunctional, I don't want to deal with this, everybody acts like you're nuts.
Yes.
And so there's that kind of like large cultural like gaslighting that happens with family. And I think that that's really ripe. I think that so many of us have had that, either, you know, Captain Daddy issues over here, or like just that wound of like, time to go to dinner with your racist fucking uncle and we're just going to let him injure you because he's your uncle.
Right.
Like,
right. And so much horror that does family stuff always, and I would be okay if I never had to read another story that did this, always goes to incest, right? And like, it's not that that's not an area, right? But like you said, it's all the seemingly innocence. Like, why do we have a whole day devoted to so-and-so? Or why is it that even though you don't talk to these people any other day of the year, you're expected to get together for this one event, or you're expected to be there, right? So that would be, that'd be exciting. Okay, so, you know, in it's 2023 now. So in like 2025, 2026, who knows? There might be a new...
2024. Call me in 2024. We'll see if I'm ready to do it again.
That feels like pretty not far away, though. So you mean like this time in 2024, right? Like,
yeah. Okay. I started the anthology. I started Aseptic and Faintly Sadistic. When did Roe v. Wade fall? Like June 26th of last year.
Okay.
And I think I started it about 5 days after that. We had decided that we were going to not sit through this quietly.
Good.
So like, maybe June of like next year, I'll be okay to like think of something.
Yeah. Okay.
I figure doing it without having to do the day job and the dissertation might be a lot easier.
I can't even imagine. I'm tired just thinking about it. So
I just take my melatonin at 9 p.m. every night and just
Oh my gosh.
done.
I know there's a couple of people that have said, and that's why I'm not in higher ed anymore. And I'm like, that makes sense to me. So the fact you're doing all three is just, and also coming onto this podcast. So thank you so much for talking to me
here.
and like explaining, answering questions I didn't give you ahead of time, and talking about an anthology that those of you who are listening need to check out. By the time you get to listen to this episode, it's 100% out because it's already out when we're recording this interview in May. And can they, because I know like Tenebrous Press tries to avoid the overlord that is Amazon. Can people get Aseptic?
It's not Tenebrous for this one. Tenebrous is for the next one. This is Cosmic Horror Monthly.
And do they do the same thing as Tenebrous? Where they...
Yes, you can get it straight from Cosmic Horror Monthly. It's also on Amazon.
Okay.
But if I remember correctly, if you get it directly from us, more money goes to the charity. There's not an Amazon cut in there. And so, like, get it right from us.
Yes.
Right from the Cosmic Horror Monthly website. Just go right to their website, right to store, right to books. It's first one right there. We've got the paper book and the ebook for you right now.
That's exciting.
Please love it. Send me an email. Review.
Yes.
Any more Vanna White shilling that I need to be doing? Let me see. Just
So for those of you that are listening, you can send us an email or contact us in our social media, and we can get a hold of Jolie. Jolie's information is also in the description of this episode, and try again not to ensure that Amazon will be ruling us all in about 5 more years by buying it directly from Cosmic Horror Monthly. Is that what it is?
Cosmic Horror Monthly, yes.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And to those of you listening, thank you for listening to our nightmares, and have a spooktacular day.
Thanks for having me.
Jolie Toomajan, she, her, is, at the time that I am speaking, a PhD candidate, although perhaps at the time you are listening, she will have PhD in hand. She is also a writer, editor, and all-around ghoul. Her dissertation is focused on the women who wrote for Weird Tales, and her own work has appeared in Upon a Thrice Time, Death in the Mouth, and Black Static, among other places. She is editor of the 2023 Aseptic and Faintly Sadistic, an anthology of hysteria fiction, which benefits the Chicago Abortion Fund and is published through Cosmic Horror Monthly. You can find her on Twitter and Instagram at Jolie Toomajan.